Welcome to the Ohio Arts Council's Rife Gallery programming series for our current show, Interwoven, The Many Voices of Fiber, curated by Tracy Rieger. Today, we are thrilled to present the artist Priscilla Roggenkamp. As a brief reminder, everyone tuning in today is in listen-only mode, so please feel free to utilize that chat function to ask questions, and we'll be sure to get to them during the Q&A portion of the hour. Also, please keep in mind that because we're presenting from separate locations, there may be some variation of bandwidth. So if one of us freezes up or the sound fluctuates, thanks in advance for bearing with us. Okay, thanks all, and welcome, Priscilla.
Good morning. Thank you, Kat. And before I get started, I just want to thank Tracy Rieger, the amazing curator of the show at the Rife. If you haven't seen it, it's a marvelous show, and all the people at Rife Gallery, particularly Kat Sheridan, for being there and making this possible. Okay, wait a minute. I thought I was good with this. Oh, there we go. Okay. Okay, so the title of my talk is The Things We Carry, and it is a theme in my work quite often. And so the textile work that I do that's sculptural often has a figural sense to it. So I'm referencing the human body, which is why I'm using clothes. And I'm also thinking about the things that we carry and changing that body form into something like luggage or buckets or something that's utilitarian. So you can see in the picture on the right-hand side, these are some sketches of forms that are very utilitarian, but also somewhat figural. These are not sketches I actually made, but as an artist, one part of my process is just dreaming and thinking. So these are process dreaming drawings that are going to get me started and get me into my process. The other photo is sort of to remind you that I'm interested in surface, and I'm interested in weaving and sewing and all the kinds of textile surfaces and what they can say and do. Two very wise women, Kat and Anya, suggested when they saw my show that I not talk just about my art, but talk a little bit about my background. So here I am. I'm going to talk a bit about my backstory. I always felt like I was an artist or wanted to be an artist. It was baked into my DNA from a very, very young age. I came from a relatively large family from today's standards, 5 kids and my parents, and we were sort of a middle-class family. My parents were both professionals. My father a pastor, my mother a musician and a music educator. And so we were, kind of middle class. We lived middle America. And I honestly didn't know any artists, or very few, maybe a graphic designer, maybe somebody who was an illustrator or something. So it took me a long time to figure out, what is an artist? How can I be an artist? And coupled with that, in my schooling, my education, there were almost no art teachers in K to 12. My whole art experience, and here I am wanting this and thinking about this, and I'm an observer, and I'm drawing, and I'm constantly, I'm a maker, I'm making things, and I'm thinking, I want to be an artist. What's an artist? What does an artist do? So I headed into this field with great passion, but also trepidation as to what did that mean. My education, as I said, in public schools was kind of limited. I had a great middle school, 7th grade art teacher who taught me linear perspective. There was a gift right there. And then nothing until my senior year, when I had this guy who was right out of college. He taught me a few things, but all I remember was he was super cute and he rode a motorcycle. That was the takeaway from my high school years of art. So when I went to Heidelberg, I was so unsure of what an artist was that I didn't even declare it as my major. I went as an undecided major because I just couldn't say those words yet. It didn't take me very long to realize that the thing I was most worried about was that everybody knew things that they'd learned that I hadn't, like art secrets, that I didn't know the art secrets. And so what I found out, and that's what I put in this heading here, is much of what you learn as an artist, you learn on your own. You may take workshops, which we all do, and classes, and learn techniques and skills, but a lot of it, you have to bring it back to yourself. You have to digest it on your own, and you have to find your own path. And so I learned at Heidelberg that I had been on a path, and it was okay. I had found that path on my own, and this was going to help me move forward. Now I was at Heidelberg for 2 years, and they did what a lot of schools did it back in the day when they ran out of money, is they canned the art department as a way to save money. So off I was to a new adventure, and I ended up at Wright State a big college, a university that I was ready for, which I wasn't when I started at Heidelberg. It had kilns and rooms full of palettes and easels and printing presses and all that, and I absolutely loved it. I finished up at Heidelberg with my teaching credentials because I wanted to be able to make a living. Zoomed off later in my life to University of Arkansas, where I got my master's in art education, and then finally at Kent State, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But I really had to find my own way, and I think artists do that. The pictures here are not from any of those educational experiences. One of the things that I wanted to do in the last 10 years, and this was through a great friend of mine, Kate McMahon, who is a master weaver. She said, I will teach you to weave, so she got me started. I have 4 looms now. It's sort of like a drug. You have to have more and more, but we did an intense 1-year study in weaving where we actually got the traditional apprentice grant, and we worked together for a year. So I like the idea of learning. I think you always are learning as an artist. And so that was my pathway there. I am also always a teacher, and I have just luckily, gratefully retired after years and years of teaching. But as I said here, teaching is complicated as an artist. It is great to make a living. And it relieves you of the burden of having to maybe sell your work all the time. But as a teacher, you give so much of your creativity. So much of it goes to your students. It goes into your projects. It goes into the ideas that you want to impart, the wisdom you want to impart. And so you're giving away a lot of what you might put into your own artwork. I will also say that being a teacher made me a better artist in every sense of the word. My students taught me to be a better artist. My colleagues certainly taught me to be a better teacher. So all those things, are wrapped up in that, desire to be an artist. I don't have enough time. I'm doing all these other things. I'm giving to my teaching, and yet I'm growing as an artist through the process of all that. Here are some of the places I taught. Blue Ridge Community College, which was great. My first professional teaching job, and here I'm teaching art history, which I was not an art historian, so I had to learn a lot to do that. That was great. I taught at University of Mount Union, which is where my husband taught for about 30 years, and I was one of a few adjuncts, so I did, wore a lot of hats there, but I learned a lot about teaching. Taught at Canton Country Day School, K-8 kids, which was fantastic. And then my grown-up job was at Ashland University, and I just retired from there after 17 and a half years. At Ashland, and this is why I put these pictures in here, I taught all kinds of things. I was the educator. I did all the student teaching, taught the methods courses to the education students, but I also taught drawing and color theory and 2D design and whatever else needed to be taught. So this was my last semester at Ashland, and you can tell by the mask on Rachel's face that this was the COVID years, and we also learned a lot during those COVID years. I've also always been a sewer. So my mom taught me to sew. Her mom is a sewer as well. And so that was always important in terms of learning about problem solving, and also learning about the craft of sewing. And that is really important to me. I did a lot of sewing that morphed into costume design, which is also kind of behind some of the thinking that I have in my own artwork. I love costume design. I like the parameters of text. I think text is really important. I like the parameters of time period and socioeconomics and all the things that when a character stands on a stage, you know who they are because of what they're wearing. Clothing tells us so much information. And so I like that aspect of costume design. This is the last costume designing I did. It's Midsummer Night's Dream, and it was about 10 years ago at Shakespeare in the Castle in Alliance. I'm also a musician, and it's part of my life. My family was a musical family. We all played instruments, we all sang. So being musical was something that was just kind of baked into our DNA as well. This is the band I play with. We've been together for 15 years, Rock, Salt, and Nails. This is a CD we've just put out called Up on the Blocks. And one of the reasons I put this in here is partly it's about who I am, but I write a lot of the lyrics for the music that we play, and I write some of the music. But I think a lot about the similarities between writing music and making art, and the choices that you make and the clarity you're looking for, whether it's choosing the right word, choosing the right phrase, looking at a phrase that is cliched and saying, that doesn't represent what I want. I need to be unique. I want to say something specific. how do I tell a story? How do I tell an abbreviated story? And all those kinds of things. So writing lyrics, writing music to me has a lot of similarities to making art. And I like to think about those two and how they're both similar and different. For about 20 years, I've shared a studio in Alliance, which is where I live, with this young man named Keith McMahon. And you might note he was in my band as well. So we're good friends. Our families are good friends, and we go way back. About 10 of those 20 years, we worked off and on as collaborators. And the first collaboration we did that was a really big, important thing for us was to go to Israel together. We were part of a group called the Partnership, where cities in Israel and cities in the United States paired up. And so we went to Akko, Israel in the Western Galilee, and that was paired up with Dallas and Canton, Ohio. We have friends in the Jewish community in Canton, Ohio, and they were telling us about this exchange. There was a theme for the show, and they said, would you like to submit an idea? And we said, if you don't mind that we're not Jewish, we would love to go. And they said, that's great. That's not what it's part of. And so we went, and we had this, not only a wonderful cultural exchange, we stayed in Israel for 2 weeks. We actually worked on our piece for a week in Israel. And then we spent some time just getting to know people, having this cultural exchange in Israel. And then this is the piece. The artist that we worked with in Israel came to the US and had an experience here. So this is our piece recreated in the US in the Canton Museum of Art. Another collaborative experience we had, and all these experiences, really forged who I am as an artist. Keith McMahon and I and our friend Ken Arthur created a sculpture for Galleon Community Hospital. Again, we submitted a proposal. It was chosen. We had a budget, and our sculpture was called Mind, Body, and Spirit. Each of us carved a stone, so that was a little out of my comfort zone, and I did the stone carving on my piece. I loved that. It was very fulfilling to do that. And each of us made a metal piece. Mine was body, Ken's was spirit, and Keith's was mind. And we had this limited budget, so Ken said, let's not hire anybody to make the foundations and supports for our stones. Let's do it ourselves. It was the first time I'd ever used the word spud and bar in the same phrase, but I learned how to use a spud bar and dig a great hole, and we poured the concrete for the footers and everything. It was a good experience. Now, one of the reasons I put this in here had to do with an experience that happened the year before. So the year before, or maybe a year and a half before we got this commission, I was making these clay bodies. I loved these forms. They're pretty good size, all made out of clay. They're faceted torsos. And I spent a year forming these things, smoothing them, really delighting in the way that you can see how the light plays off the different planes of these sculptures. Clay is not my primary medium, but I know enough, to know what I know. So I created these forms. I cut them in half, carved them out as evenly as I could, put them back together, formed them, let them dry. And a friend of mine, Ann Hendel, who is a ceramicist, she fired them for me. Now, here's what happened. Not one of them survived the firing. Not one. An entire year's worth of work, not one survived the firing. But when we got this commission, I said, my hands know what they want to do. And I'd made this form, and I knew exactly how I wanted that form to look. Fortunately, this was the form I made, and I took it up to Cleveland. I didn't fire it. I took it up wet. And the wonderful woman, Michelle Gorse, cast my bronze sculpture for me. So it was a great experience that was brought out of failure, epic failure, right? And so that's part of the life of an artist. One of the things you see me doing on the right is messing around with this piece because it weighed almost 100 pounds. We built a box around it. We took it very carefully from Alliance to Cleveland, up maybe a half a flight of stairs, just about to the top when somebody tripped and the thing clunked sideways in this box. So here I am fixing it, trying not to look panicked, fixing this before it was cast. But you can see Michelle also was interested in my education in lost wax casting. So at every step she called me and she said, you must come and see what we're doing now. So after she got the rubber and plaster mold made, you must come and see this. And I came up several times during the process and really learned a lot. And she was really a partner in my education on this sculpture. I loved it so much. And bronze casting is extremely expensive. I scraped together enough money since she had that mold, and she made me a second one. So I still have that one around. Okay, so as an artist, I've done a lot of things, 2-dimensional, 3-dimensional. This is my studio, a little printmaking here, some reduction prints. On the left is a drawing that I did as a series of drawings I was doing of camisoles. I love fabric. I love the drape. I love the sensuousness of it. I like the 2-dimensional form. I like creating the positive and negative shapes. I mean, I loved all of that stuff. And what I wanted to do was go to graduate school. I wanted to get my MFA in painting and move from what I was doing, a lot of adjunct works, to having, that real professional academic job. But I couldn't decide. I spent years saying, should I, shouldn't I, should I, shouldn't I? The time right before I got my MFA, my husband Rudy and I were living in Alliance. We're both working, me part-time, he full-time. We have 2 children. We have 2 lovely daughters, Sean and Alexa. So I'm raising children, working adjunct, trying to keep up with my artwork, trying to do all the other, life things that come out. And I'm thinking, can I fit a degree in there? And I was walking with a good friend of mine, Pam Kimball, and I'm just probably whining is the best definition. Am I going to do this? I can't decide. I can't decide. And she said, how old will you be when you get done with this degree? And I said, like 39 or 40. And she goes, well, you're going to be 39 or 40 anyways. Why don't you just do it? So, I did. And that nudge was really what it took. The reason this picture is in here is to tell you that when I went to grad school as an older adult, as a mother, a parent, a grown-up, I said, I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm going to get in and get out. I am on a path and no one will move me from this path. Let's go. So I was up there, maybe the second or third meeting with my major professor, Craig Lucas, and he looks at me and he goes, why are you drawing these things? Why aren't you sewing these things? And I had never thought about I had never known about contemporary textiles as an idea. So there are times in your life where you do these pivots. And this was one I didn't want, I didn't search out. And it was maybe the best thing that happened to me, just to be nudged in this direction of clothing as an idea, as a concept, and manifesting it as a 3-dimensional form. Okay, so on to my work. So my work is mostly clothing oriented, certainly my sculptural work. And as with the costume design, our clothing has so much context in it. What feels soft and rough and scratchy and what's too tight and what fits loose. And all this stuff about clothing. What you wore in high school, what your grandparents maybe wore back in the day, what's stylish today. We have so much information, context about clothing that is a very tricky form to take on. So one of the reasons I don't make wearable clothing is because I want to remove as many contexts as I can. And one context about wearable clothing is you're looking at it and thinking, how am I going to look in it? What does it feel to me? So I'm trying to remove some of the context. I'm trying to control. I don't want it to be about fashion. I don't want it to be about fit. I don't want it to be about your relationship to the piece as something that you can own or wear or have. So that's been a tricky thing to think about. How do I make something that is a form, that is clothing, but remove it from some of those contexts that it has? So this was an early piece called Persistence Costs. And obviously you can't wear it, but you can relate to it. If you've ever worn a dress, or even if you haven't, you know what dresses are like, the feeling of them. Some of the things that I was changing in the context certainly is that waistline, that long, thin waistline that seems very strangled. And also up at the neckline that goes all the way up to the hanger, so you couldn't possibly get your head in there. So I'm kind of pushing at that. You know what this is, but you really can't. You can't own it. You can't wear it. You can't think about it. I was also thinking about Victorian clothes. The color black was really significant, and certainly the silhouette was significant. So here's the pieces that are in the show, and I'm going to talk about those for a little bit. This first one is called Not Our Bodies, Ourselves. And in the 1970s, there was a book called Our Bodies, Ourselves. It was published from 1970 to I think 2011, updated almost yearly. And it was written by women, and about their bodies. It was about health. It was about sexuality. It was about all the things that nobody talked about back in the day that you couldn't Google if you were interested in. And it was, I always say it was a revelation and it was a revolution, this book. It was so important to women. And it started a lot of conversations among women themselves, among them and their doctors. And, it was a really necessary part of the women's movement. So I was thinking about this when I made the piece in 2019. This was before the demise of Roe v. Wade, but the conversations were out there. What is it? What kind of autonomy do women have over their body? How do we protect what we have? How do we protect, our rights? And so these women, I'm thinking of these pieces as women. These pieces are a collective of women. Speaking of the strength of women, they are literally tied together to represent the strength of women. It's one of the, there are a few times I've used this form that is sort of a mirror. The top and the bottom are the same in the clothing. So that's a form that I like to use. It sort of, again, moves the clothing into a sculptural realm rather than a literal realm. And this is made out of velour. It's all sewn and lined because I like doing that sort of thing. And it's also dyed so that it doesn't have a uniformity of skin tone. This piece is also in the show called Keepers of the Faith. I think of these as sentinels, as really big sentinels or women of wisdom sent to kind of hang out with us and keep us going in the right direction. Faith in the title could mean a lot of things. It could mean, it could have a religious context. It could have the context of faith in ourselves, faith in each other, faith in the future. So there are a lot of times I think we need someone, some entity, some ideas that keep us strong, give us faith in the future. And so that's what I was thinking about. I was also delighting in this idea of the figure as a vessel, as something that carries. And so if you don't recognize the form at the top, it's actually the clothespin bag that your grandmother might have had on her line, that she would have thrown her clothespins in when they weren't hanging up clothes. And as I was drawing that, I was like, man, I could extend this. This is a great form. So that's where that form came from. The picture on the right, I put that in there just to highlight how hard it is to photograph big pieces of artwork. So as I said, my husband was in the theater. We got this bright idea. Let's put them on the battens and fly them up and we'll light them. And it was fine, except we forgot to color correct for the theater lighting. So I still don't have any really great photos of this piece. Here they are in my studio on the left. So I was thinking of the fabric in this piece. And what did I want to say with the fabric? I wanted to have this kind of duality between something that's rigid and something that's organic. So these are men's Oxford shirts. They all have stripes on them. That was the background. That was sort of the rigidity. And then the floral fabrics were the organic nature, sort of the yin and yang, male and female. I wanted them both to be on this kind of piece. It also, the sewing is really important to me because I think it's sort of overlooked as a skill set and as technique. So if you looked inside this piece, all of the seams, as I was making this fabric from various cut up pieces of shirts, they're all flat felt. They are all ironed. They have this, they needed to look like they work together. And you can see from the top of the piece as well that proper stitching and all that is really important to me. This is my little sewing machine. I have two of these. It's a 1950s Singer featherweight, and it only goes forward and backwards. I love this machine, and I've sewn almost everything, costumes and everything I've ever sewn on this machine. So I just threw that in there. If you find one, buy one. There's not one piece of plastic on it, and this thing will live forever. Here I am making masks during the pandemic. Okay, so this series of work is called Wait Here. And there's, I think, 6 or 7 of those in the Rife Gallery right now. The series is larger than that. And it deserves a little backstory. I was asked to do a solo show. What did I want to do? And I wanted to take on ideas of immigration. And I want to preface that by saying I am not an immigrant myself, so I did not have that experience of moving and coming over. But all of the people in my background did, my grandparents, great-grandparents, great-great-greats, they've all, as many of us, unless we're indigenous peoples, we have all somewhere in our background made the choice to move to this country, probably for a better life, probably for economic or safety or religious or whatever reasons we have all moved. So I do think it's a story that is part of all of us. I also think, and clearly obvious, it's continuing to go on and on. And with climate migration, it will become even worse, as we head into the future. That said, I don't have any suggestions. I have no solutions to offer to the immigration ideas. People, if you're sort of sensitive to immigration, people want to say, well, you just want the borders open and let anybody in. That's not what I'm saying. I think it's a very difficult problem, and we do need to consider it, and we need to consider a lot of things. At any rate, I was considering all these ideas as I put together this work. These are all figural pieces. They are all made to be like luggage that are left to hang in the immigration system, waiting for that next thing, waiting for that paperwork, waiting for the new life to begin. They all have a key, and the key to me in these works is a symbol of home, the home that you left and the home that you're looking for. And they all have a tag with a number on it. And that tag is a symbol of, the anonymity that comes from being in a system like that. So you go from being a person to a number. This piece is called Blood and Water. I'm particularly moved by stories of people crossing perhaps the Mediterranean or whatever on these boats. And so many don't make it. So our water, the Mediterranean Sea, is filled with this grief. And so that's what I'm thinking about here. In terms of process, the base is a crocheted wool, and it's been felted. I threw it into my washing machine, and a couple times I got it all felted up. I added all the watery kinds of colors on top of that. And then I added the orange. If you think back in the day, those lumpy life jackets that we all wore that were that bright orange, I actually have some pieces of an old one there. And so that's what I'm trying to reference in this piece. This piece is called Who I Was. And I think about that often as like more on a personal level. I am a very organized kind of person. I have connections in the community. I have things I do. I have had jobs, and all those kinds of things that make life sort of make sense. And I was thinking that this woman represented the idea of, what do you do when you lose all that? And do you know who you are anymore? This is more of the pieces as they were in the gallery, and it was in the Not Sheep gallery. I don't know if you're familiar with that, if you're from Columbus. Karen Peterson was the wonderful director of that gallery, and it's since closed, but it was in Short North, and she was really focused on showing artwork that was controversial, showing artwork that maybe wouldn't be sold per se, and it wasn't in the marketplace, I guess I would say. The pieces I want to show you particular on this is on the far left. Most of my pieces seem to be female to me, so I wanted to make some that pushed into the gender a little bit more, either being gender neutral or being male. And so these are the carpenter and the mason that seem a little bit more, I think, gender neutral, if nothing else. I really enjoyed sewing them out of denim and leather and canvas, and that's where those are. I just want to put in here that this body of work is the body that I've submitted to the OAC for the Individual Excellent Awards, which I was super proud to have gotten. But it was this body of work that really was part of that. This piece is also in the show called Impotent Arms. I think as a parent, there's nothing that's more frightening than not being able to hold on to your children. You hold their hands when they cross the street, or you put your arms around them when they're sad. And so you think about that immigration system. And certainly I was doing this at a time when family separation was a really big deal, and we were wondering what's going to happen to these families, and will they ever come back together. So this is a vessel made out of completely felted wool sweaters. If you're much of a sewer, you know that when you set sleeves, you set them so that they're in a certain form, and gravity makes them hang beautifully down. And these are all set upside down, so they do not have any grace to them at all. They are very impotent, and they do not function the way they should. This piece is called Picking Up the Pieces. It's a bigger piece, probably the biggest piece in the set, made out of wool, felted wool. And on it, I put everything that I could find. I was thinking about leaving home, and how do you hang on to all the things that you need? How do you hang on? not just physically, but emotionally. How do you hang on to all the things you need? So I have every old ring and watch and onesie earring and, all those kinds of things are stitched into here, as well as handbags and straps and that sort of thing. This piece now lives in the Hilton Hotel in Columbus. So I haven't seen it there yet, but I hear tell it's there. So you might come across that. This one is called Will I Dance Again? I often think about young people in a situation of immigration, migration, etc. Our lives as we're older, we have perspective. Time is a little bit different, but when you're young, man, you got to get on things. It's time for love and life and fun and excitement. And how do you hang on to that when you're in a situation like that? This one's sort of self-explanatory, the weight of waiting. I'm not a good waiter. I'm not good at waiting. I like, things to happen when they're going to happen. And so I get really frustrated when I'm waiting. And I can't imagine if that wait was a year, 2 years, 10 years, how do you live with that? This one is also crocheted at its base and then sewn with canvas and straps. And you can see the number tag on there. I don't think you can see the key. And then literally weighted down with little rocks. This piece is really large. I don't know if you can tell from this photo. It's about 84 inches tall, maybe 4 feet wide. It's called the Immigration Quilt. And it's layered about 3 or 4 layers of sweaters and then little clothes on top of that. I wanted to have that feeling of the cage that we saw on the news so much, people in these cages and stuff. So I was trying to figure out, how do I make a chain link fence that's not made out of metal, that's soft and pliable and still holds up. And so that was I did a lot of exploration trying to find the right material. And what I happened on was men's waxed shoelaces that you might put in your dress shoes. They have a great body to them. So you can see on the picture in the middle, there are individual dozens and dozens of stitches on each piece of that to hold it in place. I even based it. I had to do the geometry and base to get all the lines right and all that in order to make this work. And it took, I think, about 4 months on my dining room table, working a little bit every day to get the chain link fence stitched on there. I also did a series of collagraphs. Collagraph prints comes from the idea of collage. So you're making a collage on a background, whether it's wood or cardboard, and gluing these things on that are fairly flat things, and then inking that and printing it. So that's what a collagraph is. These are called the Family Separation series. So the collagraph with all the keys on the left, I don't know if you remember the scares of a few years ago when people were talking about caravans of people are coming to our country. So I was trying to represent, this caravan of people who are just searching for their home. That's what the keys are. In the middle, I was using needles that I could thread, as those little needles are individual family members. So you can see there's big needles and small needles, and they're threaded together, but that threading is very tenuous. So, those are the kind of the ideas that were in these collagraphs. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you about some of my older work and just kind of give you a context of how I got to the work that I'm showing in the Rife Gallery right now. I was fortunate enough to have a residency at Haystack Mountain School of Crafts in Deer Isle, Maine, and it was life-changing. It was really, just a turning point in my art experiences. But the residency was only 2 weeks long, a little bit less than 2 weeks. So I knew I had to hit the ground running. In a residency, you want to be open to pushing your ideas in different directions. You don't want to have, you don't want to just come and labor. You want to really explore. But I thought if I didn't have something to start with, I might flounder a little bit at the beginning. So I decided I was going to make these ocean buckets. I was making vessels, figurative vessels that look like buckets. And so these two on the far left are the ocean buckets I was going to make. In the center, this is what influenced me: Winslow Homer's paintings of these women at the sea, and the wind is blowing them and they're, tossed on the sea. And I knew I was going to the ocean. I really wanted that. If you can see the small picture on the right, that is an actual sailing bucket. So if you're going out on an ocean going vessel, you might have a bucket like that. So I was trying to replicate that or put some of those ideas into my piece. It's also, if you see anyone working on the electrical lines, you might see a bucket like that, because you're not going to get electrocuted when you put your stuff in it. anyways, here I was at Haystack, and I wanted to dye these things. And the woman who was in sort of our helper, our assistant in the textile area said, I have a vat of indigo dye. Would you like to use it? And yes, please was the answer. So I dyed these in indigo. And here's my plan. I knew I had about a week and a half left. I was going to dunk these in the ocean every single day. I was going to pull them out of the ocean and let them dry and take on the patina of salt and sand and, all the things that seemed like this journey, these vessel dresses people would take. So I did, and I would throw them in the ocean every day. They're really heavy, full of water. They work as buckets, and the waves would come, and I'd be barely able to haul them back out again. But what happened was they just look clean every day. They just look clean. So I'd hang them up and let them dry, and there they were clean. So yet another idea that, there's a kernel of something there that was important, but it didn't quite work out. So I took them home in June, and they weren't slated for a show until January. And so they lived outside in my yard for months, and they did get tossed by the wind and the storms and the rain and some snow and all that. And they did start to take on that wear that I wanted them to have. These vessels look like they'd been around. And so that was what I was looking for in these forms. They became the base of one of my first sort of installation piece called Refugee. So you can see the two dresses and a little raft and some sand. And then the bags on the wall all have images of the journey of these vessels. So I really like that. And I tie them together with strings, and I use the symbol of key again. So I have a lot of keys on these as well. So this is going to take us to some really current work. Just last year, I was in a show called The Earth Is Us. It was curated by the wonderful Columbus area artist Shar Norman. And so I was making a piece for that. It was at the Columbus Cultural Center in the fall last year. Anyways, I started with this idea. I was going to make a piece that was representing sedimentary earth. So I was doing these layers and layers and layers of these deconstructed clothing. And it was going to be about 4 feet tall and maybe 16 feet wide. And I was thinking about pressure and all those sort of geological time and all that sort of thing, but it just wasn't making it for me. So I kind of backed up and said, what else do I want to say? And so I was thinking about the elements of earth, air, fire, earth, and water. And then I was thinking about us and how we're all part of that. And I was also thinking about the textile industry. And if you know much about the textile industry, it's like the number 2 polluting industry in our world. And so I was thinking about how all those elements are also affected by the textile industry. So that's where that idea came from. So this is Earth. This was just shown. This is a piece at the Manifest Gallery in Cincinnati. I was really glad to have that in there. And these are the 4 pieces: Earth, air, water, and fire. And like your friends, you don't like them all equally. I really like Earth. I'm super happy with air. Water, I'm not bonding with water in the same way, and the same with fire. I look at them and I think, oh, now I know what I would do with them. But that's one of the challenges of making art, because by the time you're done with a piece, you know exactly what you should have done, and you're not going to do it again. It's not like I'm manufacturing. I'm not cranking these out. So yeah, I do love at least 2 of them, and I kind of like the other 2. So that's just the way it is. So this is a picture of my family, and I put this in here because it relates to the next piece. This is the tribe, and we had lots of adventures together. And one of the things my mom would do would be to sew us clothing. And I was thinking that was such a 60s thing, because here we are in the 60s. But I was just today looking at friends' pictures on Facebook, and they had all their grandkids dressed in the same jammies, dressed in the same, So I guess we still do that sort of thing. But I was asked to be in a show called Women's Work. And I was thinking, as all of us, what kind of women's work do I want to reference? And I was thinking that women, and I would say parents as well, because I hate to leave out men in this, but nurturing is really important. And I was thinking about my siblings. There's 5 of us, and we are all so very different. I mean, really different. And, you know, my mom would say we all came out different. But what was the commonality between us? It's the nurture that our parents gave us. It is the work ethic. It is the love. It is the, you know, the ideas that were central to our family. And so that's overlaid and still overlaid on all of our quirky, weird personalities that are very, very different. So that's what I made, that this piece of children's clothes, different sizes, different ages, and different gender type of clothes. And my mom actually sewed them with me. So that was really cool. I enjoyed that. This is a piece called Turn, Turn, Turn. And the title comes from a Bible verse in Ecclesiastes, to everything there is a season. It's also a song, if, you know, to everything turn, turn, turn. So I think about how much I feel like the same person that I've always been when I was 8 or 12 or 15 or 20 or 30 or whatever. There's that kernel of who we are that is always the same. And yet we're always responding to different challenges, different ideas, different hats we need to wear, different roles we need to take on. So I like the idea of having this very repetitive and similar format or shape for these forms, and then just playing with different, most of them found fabrics, found clothing, and just kind of playing with, okay, how can I change this? How can I move this over? And so that as you look across them, you know, you're kind of seeing similarities and differences at the same time. One of my themes, as I said earlier, was the body as a vessel. And so I've done a lot of pieces that I call bucket forms. And I like that the handle becomes sort of the neckline, and that these are both suggestive, a little bit of a figure, but also of a bucket or something that you would carry. These pieces are also, particularly the one on the left, far left, is the beginning of my starting to weave. So I'm weaving on a loom. I'm weaving baling twine from my friend's farm, and I'm making that centerpiece out of woven, and then found objects, and then the coat of a deceased friend. So that one's called Old Heart, Oxed Heart. In the middle, I was also weaving on my loom, and I was using some of the fabric left over from the pieces that went to Israel, because I sent over 3 entire bolts of fabric, and now it's just sitting around. So I sliced some of that up and combined it with some wool thread and yarn, and made this, and that's called A Bucket of Old Memories. And then the one on the right-hand side, A Bucket of Old Promises, I think, or something like that, is off loom weaving. So I created this form by lark's head knots at the top of a form, stretching them down, securing them at the bottom. I actually had a knot that I would hang it from the ceiling and put my foot on the bottom of it to give it tension. And then I wove baling twine and fabric and all kinds of things in there. This is an older piece called Thin Dresses. There are times in your life, and I was really thinking about this time when I was deep into parenting, deep into, you know, trying to figure out who I was as an artist, deep into all the things that life entails. And I talk about feeling stretched. And I was thinking, you know, what would my body wear if it could wear what I feel, not who I am? And so I was really feeling thin and drawn out, and, you know, kind of stretched. The one on the green one on the far right even has a rock at the bottom of it that it's tied to. So, you know, I was feeling all those things. It's also, you can see in the second one from the right that I've used that mirror image form here, and the camisole mirror image form, and that I did in Not Our Bodies Ourselves. And this was the first time I did that mirror image form with these jackets, and these are called Red Sisters. There's 3 of them. I have 2 sisters, so they're kind of referencing the 3 of us. These are really long and very thin, very hard. If you're a sewer, it was hard. I will tell you, it was very hard to set the sleeves. You could set them at the top, but man, at the bottom, took a whole bunch of fussing and taking them out and trying over and over again. They're completely lined. The buttonholes all work. So it has this sort of, I can function, but I really can, and you could never get in me. This is in a museum in Florida, the Brogan Museum. And it was a show called, a very odd title, called Coming Out of the Closet, Clothing as a Emerging Art Form. And I thought, to talk about contexts that are odd, it was just a very, very odd title there. One of the things I'm particularly interested in is the sustainability of textiles. And I'm currently, I have these 3 pieces down in Cincinnati at Wave Pool Art. I was part of a project called 1 Year, 1 Outfit. And it was sponsored by the Rust Belt Fiber Shed, which is a group. The Rust Belt Fiber Shed is a geographical location. It's 250-mile radius of Cleveland, Ohio. And so the 30 of us that made outfits, we sourced all the materials in the outfits from just 250 miles around Cleveland. So just like you would eat local, this is like, how could you dress local? And it's kind of a mindset idea. So the dress, I don't have sheep and I don't spin and that sort of thing, but I have friends that do. And that dress, all the yarn was within 20 miles of my home. So that's my 20-mile dress. All the dyes in the shrug are eco dyes. Some that I did and most that other friends of mine did. I grew red onions so I could dye the stripes in the dress. So thinking about the art form, but also this textile idea and how I can be more sustainable in my art practice was really important to this idea. A few more slides yet. So currently I'm working on a new idea that it is not formed yet. It is just in its infancy. And I'm taking what I'm thinking of as abstracted corsets and thinking of a corset as sort of a protective device. And I'm making pieces out of that. They're going to be wall pieces. I'm also thinking about the Greek myth of Persephone and Demeter, who are mother and daughter. So this is kind of a starter piece, and you can see that I've got some things going on here, lots of sewing, some weaving, some rigidity, some drapiness, you know, and as I said, I'm just beginning this thought, and I'm excited about where it's going to go. I've also collected about 100 or more pair of work gloves or used gloves. Most of them are work gloves or garden gloves. And they are destined to be in a piece someday that has to do with the dignity of work, but I'm not really sure what that's going to be yet. But I'm starting to become super attached to each of these gloves, and I started drawing their portraits, and they're so lovely that I almost can't imagine putting them together in one piece because each one is so singular and each one has a life story of its own. So as I said, I'm at the beginning of this. It is textile based, which I love. It has wear in it, which I love. And so there's a lot of these gloves here. And I'm going to leave you today. This is a picture from a show I was in the MIB gallery in Buchanan, West Virginia. But I'm going to leave you with a thought and a misremembered quote that I had. This is from the book called Walking on Water, Reflections of Faith and Art on Madeline L'Engle. And she is a Christian, so it is based in a lot of her Christian ideas. But if you're not a Christian or if you're not religious at all, there's still a lot in this book that you might like. At any rate, she quotes another writer who says, all of writing is like a huge lake, and I'm going to say all of art is like a huge lake. Great rivers feed that lake, like Tolstoy and Dostoevsky, and there are others that are simply trickles like her. And she said, I don't matter, but the lake matters. Now, the way I misremembered that was all of art is like a river. And I like that better because the river keeps moving. And we are all just supposed to add to that river, whether we're a big tributary or a small trickle. And there are times in my life as an artist, I've really felt like that small trickle. And other times I've had the good fortune to be, you know, a gusher coming in. But I know many of you are artists or makers of some kind. And I think all makers, we are in that, we are feeding that river. And that's the analogy that stays with me. So it's what I love. And I'm very happy to be able to feed that river however I can. And there you go. Thank you, Kat. That's
Perfect.
great.
So now is the time where we'll take questions if folks have them. And while we're waiting for any questions that might arise, I will start with my own. So I like to ask artists in general, if they have like a ritual or a standard for their studio life. Like, what is a day in the studio for you? How do you approach it? Is there a, like, take us through that, set the scene for us? Yeah,
Oh, that's a good question. Oh, should I stop sharing too? Should I?
sure.
Okay. I don't know. All right, let me try that. Okay. So I would say not a day, but I do have studio rituals. And one is, and I think a lot of people can relate to that. When I'm starting something new, it is the cleaning ritual. It is the organizing all the materials. It is putting away the last ones. It's moving things around. So that's really important to me. And if I feel like I don't know what I'm going to do, then I organize, and that helps me structure. But the second thing I do is write. I do a lot of writing. And I think about things in terms of written, how do I structure things and write them? Then I'll work, and then I'll go back and write again, and then I'll work and go back again. I try to leave the studio every day with some notes of like, tomorrow you're going to address this. Tomorrow you're going to figure this problem out, so I try to not leave finished so that it brings me back in with a way to start, particularly when I'm in the middle of something.
Yeah, we had another artist share that she always leaves something to be excited about coming back to. I love that as like a motivation. So it's wonderful. Are you like a morning? Do you start early in the morning?
Well, I am a morning person. And so it just depends on other things in life. But yeah, I kind of do my best thinking in the morning, but I can't paint as well in the evening. But once I'm doing what is rote, like once I'm doing things that are sewing and that sort of thing, I can do that anytime. But if that incubation process, it's the morning that I've got to do that.
Perfect. We have a question from our friend Shar Norman, who would like to know, does your music influence your art, and how does your art influence your music?
I don't know about influence, but there is a lot of really interesting commonalities. One is, and this probably doesn't answer your question, but one is, there are times when I'm making art that that everything falls into place. And you just go like, yes, this is so I've been gifted this idea, and everything fell into place. And there are times when I'm writing music that it's like that the song is written and I think, dang, who did that one? It's just there. And there are other times that I'm hammering, beating, this thing into its shape. And both of them are good. I mean, sometimes the ones that fall into place are really good. And sometimes the one I hammer, are just really good too. So that's a similarity between the two. I don't know if they influence, except thinking about process and being like confident that this process I have as an artist, I can use this process as a writer. And this process I have as a writer, oh, okay, I can use that process. There's, this sort of interchangeable parts there.
Wonderful. We have a question from Jennifer on Facebook. Did your daughters inherit any of your creative drive?
Not drive per se. They're creative, but I think creative in different ways. So my oldest daughter has her master's in art history, so she said, "You've drugged me to so many museums, this makes sense to me." But she's not a maker. She's not confidence in her making. She's a really good cook, so that's where her making comes up. And my younger daughter is more textile oriented. She likes sewing and knitting. She's taken up knitting and that sort of thing. But yeah, I think sometimes kids are like, my parents do that, I'm not doing it. So I think that might be part of it.
Yeah. We have a question from Anya. What period of your artistic career has taught you the most?
Taught me the most. That's interesting. I think definitely when I was young and going through school, but a lot of that's a blur. There's just, you've taken classes where you should be getting, and I see this in my students, oh, you should be getting so much out of this, but you really have other things on your mind. It might be that guy sitting next to you, or something. So I do think once I started teaching, and I had to show in the faculty show every year, that really pushed me. That to not just make some work, but to make a body of work that's going to stand up and you're going to talk about it. That was really a good nudge for me. So even as an adjunct at Mount Union, all the adjuncts were in the faculty show, and you better show up and bring your A game. So, you know, that kind of forced me to define my artistry and where I was going with it.
That's wonderful. So you talked a lot about things that inspire you. A lot of it is life and things happening around us. You also talked about that at the front. I'm curious, are there artists that are either, you know, long ago past or contemporary that you lean into when looking for additional inspiration?
I'll tell you, I had some in here, and maybe I talked too long, so I took them out. But one artist that I love, just the way she thinks, and her name is Doris Salcido. She's a Colombian artist, and her work, when I first saw her work, it actually moved me to tears. It was just, and I didn't even know what it was about. I didn't understand it, but it was so beautiful and so haunting that it really moved me to tears. There are a lot of textile artists I really like. Certainly going back, Magdalena Abakanowicz, who's a Polish artist who was kind of at the forefront of textiles as being an art form. I mean, she's amazing. Just so many. But then, you know, the first artist I ever knew, like really knew as an artist, was Andrew Wyeth, because my family was in Maine. And, you know, so I grew up looking at his work, particularly those drawings, which I think are superior to the paintings. They're just amazing. And the haunting nature of all that. And so Andrew Wyeth, Degas was always like my muse. I just loved his work. But moving into textiles, there's so many wonderful artists.
That's wonderful. Thank you. I am curious, as a closeout question for folks that I loved that you talked about not having language around how to identify yourself as an artist, not even like knowing that there was this kind of friction there. So those that are dipping their toe into the creative process, whether they be 18 or 72, what is your suggestion for getting in there and doing it?
Here's my biggest suggestion. Don't worry about the silos. You know, people want to know, are you a painter? Are you a this? Are you a that? Are you abstract? Don't worry about it. Go with where your heart goes and you'll figure it out. I'm a better artist at my age because I look back on the path that I didn't understand I was taking. And when I look back, the path was straighter than I thought it would be. But when you're starting out and you're listening to this voice and that voice, it's really hard. So just try to go with what you want. Be real intentional about what inspires you. So when you look through a magazine or you go to a museum and you're drawn to something, be drawn to it and just, okay, why? Okay, why am I drawn to this? And that will tell you who you are too as an artist. But yeah, it is hard. And you don't have to make every day, and you don't have to be passion, you know, it doesn't have to be your first. You can take one step at a time and walk slowly towards something. So that's a really good question. And it's hard. I don't know why we want to define who we are all the time. And sometimes we just need to be and figure it out later.
Perfect. I think that is an excellent way for us to wrap up. I want to thank you again for the talent and time that you've given to all of us, Priscilla, particularly. And big thank you to Tracy for curating this exhibition, as well as the other artists that are a part of the exhibition. A big thank you to the governor, the legislature, and the Ohio Arts Council's board for supporting the Rife Gallery, and of course, Ohio artists. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you.